A little while ago, I was playing an old copy of Medal of Honor Airborne, and there was one noticeable flaw with the way it was designed. The best gun in the game is stolen from the Germans in the first mission and used from every mission after if you have any sense. And that spoke to me and how the best way to kill an insect was to take its weapon and turn it on them. So why don't you join me as I give you a comprehensive analysis of For No Good Reason and the deluded, psychotic meltdown he had over several years, attacking anybody and everybody because he wasn't getting the attention he believed he deserved, and how the rest of the community he claimed to be a part of did nothing. I don't think I need to introduce you to Anthony Aguilar, but just in case this is your first episode of the series, let me briefly summarize. Anthony Aguilar is a member of the Brony analysis community who spends a great deal of time passive-aggressively sniping at everyone around him, playing up arguments among other content creators as big controversial wars, and picking individual targets out of a large pool of analysts to chase after and hound endlessly. He loves to jump onto any rumor that happens in the Brony community and play it up for attention and easy clicks, simultaneously condemning the people who spawn rumors and taking their words as gospel. He was among one of the many people pushing the false story about KP being a slave driver, and has spent the last year and a half of his life producing a web series where he reads off what I can only assume are the emails in his sent folder. Why does Aguilar do this? Hard to say. Because Aguilar is a compulsive liar, his motivations for this behavior change every time he's forced to talk about it. Sometimes he wants to enforce quality control in the fandom, sometimes he's just a sadistic little shit because he thinks admitting that means anything, and sometimes he's a troll who wants to poke people for a laugh. This constantly shifting motivation reveals Aguilar's actual motivations. He's a petty and vindictive little bastard, taking out his anger on other people and projecting his insecurities onto everyone around him. It was in March of 2016 when Aguilar began this series of unending public tantrums with the release of How Not to Brony, a video wherein Aguilar spent 2.5 minutes sending passive-aggressive messages to everyone within his social circle. This basic idea would continue for the next several months, with Aguilar growing ever more vindictive as he threatened people, spewed out racial and homophobic slurs like they were candy, and in one particular display of vindictiveness referred to another person as a burden on society, a mentally impaired, cross-eyed prom night dumpster baby ass, and a botched living abortion.
Mandy Chan, you're a burden on society, and the only reason I was told by anyone not to smack the piss out of you publicly wasn't because anyone liked you, because they don't, was because people had a social responsibility to look up for your mentally impaired, cross-eyed, prom night dumpster baby ass. You're a botched living abortion, and my desire to shut up about you has gone out the window.
And if you're wondering what the other person did to warrant such vile displays of psychopathy, they broke up with someone via YouTube video. Somebody that Aguilar just got done saying equally disgusting things about, and resumed saying equally disgusting things about immediately afterward. This man seriously needs a beating from some very large women. Aguilar's work is little more than brigading, where he drums up a small but violent community in the hopes they'll harass his targets with downvotes and abusive comments, and sitting around in a big circle jerk where they all pretend to be oh so amused by what they perceive as their enemies. So first question, how the fuck does something like this go unabated for nearly 2 years? Well, for one, we have to factor in that Aguilar's a complete nobody in the eyes of the larger community. Most of his behavior goes completely unnoticed by the majority of the audience. But it's no surprise that the rest of the creators have certainly taken notice of his ongoing meltdowns. Toon Critic, Golden Fox, Lightning Bliss, Keyframe, and many others have been on podcasts and live streams with Aguilar in the past. His behavior certainly had to have crossed their minds at some point. I mean, if a single piece of unsourced artwork catches their attention and also gets their panties in a twist, certainly this has to, right? Right? Well, it has, they just haven't bothered to do anything about it, and through inaction, they have condoned his behavior. Let's find out why. Well, first we have to get into the way in which Aguilar continues to justify his own actions to himself, and by extension everyone around him. Aguilar is a big fan of the moral high ground, a fallacious argument that proposes that one is right because one is more moral. I've derided it in the past for being a lazy and ineffective foo strategy for people who are extremely bad at the whole being right concept. Let's explain why. Putting aside the fact that morality is a nebulous social construct, merely having the high ground isn't much of a claim. You could have the high ground by being an unsullied virtuous innocent, or simply not being as terrible as mathematically possible. It's possible to have the moral high ground over someone and still be in the wrong, and this is a concept that many people struggle with. It's common among first-year philosophy students to debate which player in World War II was worse, Hitler or Stalin. When these debates reach the internet, you're almost certain to find people pulling out a laundry list of Stalin's crimes against humanity and yell, "What about this?" The problem with doing that is that the question is not who was evil, the question is who was more evil. Hitler was objectively worse than Stalin, but that fact did not make Stalin's own actions in the Soviet Union suddenly become justifiable. Stalin had the moral high ground over Hitler, but all that actually meant was that dealing with Stalin had to wait until Hitler had been dealt with. You see the problem now? And this is putting aside the fact that many of the people Aguilar attacks have done little more than trivial wrongdoing, while Aguilar engages in long-term sustained harassment. The additional claim with the moral high ground is that it's an argument by assertion. Aguilar loves to claim the moral high ground, but doesn't grasp that merely claiming it doesn't mean you actually have it. In much the same way that claiming to be mature doesn't actually make you mature. In fact, it more often says the opposite. A good rule of thumb is that if someone goes and announces that they've won an internet forum discussion, they probably very much haven't. The majority of the time, declaring victory is just a spin, a last desperate attempt to trick people into believing you came out on top, provided that they don't actually go and read the discussion in the first place. When combined with the ability to expel someone from the discussion, Danth's law takes on a more sinister tone, indicating that a group or individual can only defend themselves on their own terms through the medium of extreme deceit. Just because you claim to be something doesn't mean it's true. Fox News likes to claim they're fair and balanced. They are no such thing, and making that claim only draws attention to the fact that they aren't. This goes hand in hand with the other common trick Aguilar likes to pull, and indeed is emblematic of every single internet crybaby in the history of internet crybabies. Aguilar sees something that makes him mad, expresses that anger, and then immediately walks back on it to put up a facade of being amused by everything and doesn't care. But if he actually were an amused troll who doesn't care, he wouldn't have made 40 fucking videos that amount to little more than bitching about other people who pissed him off, often over imaginary and yet still trivial wrongdoing. People this desperately insecure use words like disappointed and amused to describe their reaction to the other person's arguments. I could respond to your immature, petty, insulting kind, but I'm not going to stoop to your level, they say, which is a good enough sentiment when you just act on it, but extremely douchey and ironic when you actually say it. This is the same gambit that every troll has used, and you'd have to have been born yesterday to buy it. See something, get mad, scream about it, and then when the target bites back at you, immediately put on a smug grin and start trying to paint them as the one getting triggered by everything. This is called psychological projection, wherein you accuse another person of engaging in your behavior. People who deride others for having thin skins always have skins like tissue paper when actually challenged. Of course, one of the things that put Aguilar into my critical lens was that he eventually started turning his deluded and dishonest tantrums in my direction, often tagging me in posts on Tumblr, DeviantArt, and YouTube, even if he doesn't actually mention my name within the bulk of the post itself, just to make sure that I saw them, and then proceeded to have a screeching meltdown every time I so much as mentioned his name in any context that was negative. There were several videos that talk about Aguilar's behavior in rather vague terms, from Glass of Water to 2016 3am Ramble series, often remarking briefly on the way he behaves whenever something even remotely newsworthy happens. And of course, Horse Famous, which highlighted his behavior along with the behavior of many other people because Aguilar is not original in this regard. Every time one of these videos went up, within 24 hours there would be some kind of response from Aguilar in a tediously long episode of How Not to Brony, where he and a hug box of people all proceed to stroke a hate boner for me as they make poorly constructed arguments to counter the things I say, call me all the usual names they call everyone else, and just pat each other on the back for showing that evil woman what for. All this culminated in May of 2017 when Discord Princess went up and briefly showed Aguilar's puppet alongside the phrase anonymous nobodies, apparently angry that I didn't make it very clear that Aguilar, Horse News, and Chan sites are separate entities in a passage that was actually alluding to all the people who believe the nonsense about KP. Aguilar proceeded to go on what can only be described as a histrionic meltdown, complete with constantly dead naming and misgendering me, and then proceeding to make excuses for why the dead naming and misgendering was okay. This is a common excuse made by transphobes of every breed, where they find something objectionable about the person in question and then use that as an excuse to misgender them because actually being called a transphobe will make them cry, claiming that I don't deserve to have my gender respected because of a clerical error that he only imagines exists, and wouldn't be worth shit even if it did exist. However, it's painfully obvious that none of these people would practice this same attitude towards a cis person, and also I wasn't born yesterday, idiots. Anyway, because my wife was not happy that Aguilar had defaced her work yet again, she filed for the video to be taken down. Aguilar responded by blaming me and then posting my wife's email address on Twitter. This post was reported and taken down by Twitter, and he was suspended for several hours, and then proceeded to blame me again and actively lie about the purpose of the banning. So let's go through Aguilar's process, shall we? Aguilar sees something in a video, misunderstands it, and then gets mad. Aguilar proceeds to scream about it in a public venue, making a complete ass of himself and outing himself as a bigot in the process. Aguilar then proceeds to be punished for this, even if that punishment is little more than a slap on the wrist. Aguilar lies about who punished him and the reason for punishing him, and then posts sensitive information about a different person online. Aguilar is punished for this again, and then lies about said punishment again. Aguilar makes another video where he throws a histrionic tantrum where he tries very hard to pretend he's above it all, and the cycle begins all over again. All of this started because I referred to Aguilar as a nobody, while he's accused me of sending fans to attack him, accused me of worshipping people he's arbitrarily decided are bad, accused my relationship of not being real, and repeatedly trash-talked my wife in the process, and has had multiple meltdowns on Twitter where he proceeds to reveal just how much of a red pill swallowing nutcase he is. And remember kids, according to Aguilar, who's constantly going on massive rants about anyone who looks at him funny, I'm supposed to be the triggered lunatic in all this. Also, this is interesting to note. Multiple times throughout his series, Aguilar derides someone for their appearance. Be it acne, their clothing, or just the general look of their face. In recent episodes, he's harped on the fact that I have a beard shadow due to my hair being darker than my skin, and showing through regardless of how close my shave is, because Aguilar doesn't understand the difference between shaving and electrolysis. Anthony Aguilar has a face that screams windowless van, and really ought not to be talking shit about other people's physical appearances. I think there's a general rule to work from: don't say other people are ugly when you look like Quasimodo with third-degree burns. Also, I should point out that Dr. Wolf is another contentious point here. Yes, it seems that Aguilar has this seething hatred of Dr. Wolf that even goes beyond his hatred of me. Now, I can understand why people hate me. I frequently tell morons that they're wrong, and the biggest trait of a moron is the inability to handle that. But Dr. Wolf? The man is so passive, so non-confrontational, that I have a hard time finding anyone who actually dislikes him. I don't particularly like Dr. Wolf's content, but that's because he's so passive and refuses to draw a conclusion on anything, which leads to the videos being unsatisfying to watch. I did some digging, and it turns out that the reason some people hate Dr. Wolf is because he doesn't pay the artists who draw for his series. Then I went and spoke to the people who actually did the artwork for his series, and they were fully aware that this was a volunteer job and went ahead with it anyway of their own volition. The one reason Aguilar has for attempting to smear Dr. Wolf's name fell apart the moment I spoke to the people who had been supposedly wronged by him, and they told me that such an idea was completely full of shit. So just like KP, if there really was a big problem, people wouldn't work with him. But when has the truth ever mattered to Aguilar or any of the shit stains who associate with him? But hold on, Lily, I hear you say. If Aguilar's behavior's been such a problem for so long, then why are you the only one to talk about it? Where's Firebrand? Where's Toon Critic? Where's the rest of them? Well, the answer is, they're right behind him, egging him on. There's something you need to remember about most content creators in the analysis community. They have extreme apathy to anything that doesn't affect them personally. Anything that does affect them, regardless of how trivial, is something they need to campaign against. But the minute it doesn't, it's drama and not worth paying attention to. All the rhetoric about respecting opinions and hypocrisy is little more than a shield for the actual motivation. Not my problem, fuck you. Many of these people are in a prime position to help a lot of other people in the community who are being harassed or bullied, but they don't consider harassment a problem worth dealing with until they think it's happening to them or to a close friend or being done by someone they have a personal grudge against. Hence why I get the title of polarizing content creator for the horrible crimes I've committed, like telling individual people that they're wrong, or exposing the disgusting bigotry within their ranks, or actively writing off garbage political philosophy as being garbage political philosophy. Many of them were very upset when I insinuated that Brawny Buck was a neo-Nazi because he pushed the idea that being transgender is a mental illness and cited an actual neo-Nazi as proof of this. Of course, I insinuated that he was a neo-Nazi because that's exactly what this kind of belief and behavior displays. If he didn't want to be called a neo-Nazi, maybe he should stop spouting their beliefs. Aguilar, meanwhile, behaves so badly, so frequently, that it's not long before the apathy begins to set in. There's a point where a massive number of people were complaining about him, including Lightning Bliss, Toon Critic, Red Skull, Sweetie Bloom. Look, I've been over the footage of his web series where he whines about every single person who says a mean thing about him, and I'm struggling to come up with someone who hasn't at least once expressed outright disgust by his continued existence. However, if we fast forward to today, that indignance has long since faded while Aguilar's behavior has only gotten worse. Josh is flat out handing Aguilar new targets. Lightning Bliss seems to love using him as a comparison for how horrible other people are, despite being completely apathetic to what he's actually doing. Fuck, there's some mixed messages right there. And Toon Critic seems to afford more time to a briefly unsourced piece of artwork than actual dedicated harassment. The apathy has set in, and more people would rather focus on the lady who tells people that they're wrong about cartoons because, well, let's be fucking honest here, I far outweigh Aguilar and them in terms of an audience, and if you're someone with absolutely zero integrity whatsoever, you have no qualms about inventing entire stories from whole cloth to get that tiniest bit of their attention. Yeah, let's not forget that part, by the way. People like Aguilar, Toon, Lightning Bliss, and this guy who stalks my TV tropes page love to pretend that I'm a polarizing creator, but at the end of the day, what do I actually do? I sometimes tell people that an episode or a show they like is actually bad, or that their opinion is based on faulty information and are therefore misinformed or wrong. Boo fucking who. And this bothers them because I don't plaster it with a million only my opinion qualifiers like a bunch of other YouTubers do. We've talked about this already. The hypocrisy is obvious. These people don't actually care about the different opinions they claim to be defending or the integrity of the fandom itself. They don't care about anybody's well-being except their own. They expect contradictory ideas to bend the knee to them, as it were, and they have no qualms about getting in bed with known shitheads who will get away with far more simply because it's expected of them. Toon Critic himself was on board with that ridiculous hate campaign against KP that was based on absolute lies. Josh got into bed with 8chan and Kiwi Farms, websites populated by neo-Nazis, pedophiles, stalkers, doxing, and other assorted facets of human garbage because the mean lady told him his opinions were wrong. And that was more important to him than all the horrid actual felonies these websites were engaging in because it didn't include him and so he didn't care, and then had the gall to be indignant when I accused him of being a phony Christian for spitting on the fundamental ideals of his own religion. Don't be a greedy, callous shit person. Toon Critic and Lightning Bliss spammed me with respect the artist for weeks on end because I refused to kowtow to threats, and then turned around and tried to paint me as the bad person because I dared respond to the accusations and unpack the issue that it had sprung up from. These people do not take issue with Aguilar because at the end of the day they're kindred spirits. They, like Aguilar, will throw a public meltdown when somebody tells them no, or you're wrong, and do not immediately bend the knee to them on demand. I have personally offended them, and that is more important than someone bullying others. When that happens, they fold their arms and declare, nothing to do with me. Even when they were bothering to rake Aguilar through the mud for his behavior, it was only when he was turning his attention to them. Every other time, it apparently wasn't worth dealing with. Aguilar targeting me was only the instigating factor. The sheer level of horrific abuse he was throwing on extremely vulnerable people it would be irresponsible to name was what led to this video actually being made. Now here comes the important part. Despite the seeming expose of this video, I've talked about Aguilar's disgusting behavior in the past, but every time I do, there's always a few sycophants who rush in to claim that I'm just giving Aguilar attention, that this is what he wants. I disagree. You see, every time I've mentioned Aguilar, he's always reacted extremely negatively, making another episode of his horrific series and screaming for an ungodly amount of time. A video like this is not what Aguilar wants. He wants a platform. This is shown by the numerous times, even when he's acting indignantly, that he's demanded I come on his podcast or be on How Not to Brony. He wants an opportunity to yell in a way that has to be taken seriously and heard. He doesn't want someone blowing the lid on his nonsense, and he wants me to engage with him directly and pretend he has something of value to say. And the answer was no. Every time. I don't engage directly with him for the same reason I don't engage with the likes of Anonymous, 8chan, or Kiwi Farms. They're all cut from the same cloth of pathetic sad sacks who desperately need other people to mock to feel better about their own lives. Aguilar is emblematic of these different communities. By ridiculing those he perceives as mentally ill or otherwise horrible, Aguilar feels functional and successful by comparison. By putting these people up on his series, he rejects the notion that he himself might share anything in common with his targets, and that works so long as he pretends not to care too much. This is why the extremely loose comparison to Anonymous or 4chan bothered him so much that he had a 45-minute meltdown about it. Aguilar desperately needs to believe that there are people out there worse than him, so much so that whoever edits the MLP Analysis TV Tropes page felt the need to make this known to people before it was cut for being clearly bullshit. This perceived sense of not being on the very bottom of the cultural ladder is extremely important to him, and he will quickly devolve into gibbering nonsense when he doesn't get it. And the sad part is that Aguilar is not the only person in this community to pull this crap. This is Night-Eye. He'll like that he just heard his own name because he's a tremendous egotist who's been thirsty for my attention quite literally for years. Night-Eye is a YouTuber who loves to write responses to random videos on DeviantArt and spam the website with think pieces of any rando who happened to piss him off that day. Why do this on DeviantArt and not Twitter or Tumblr? Well, it's simple really. DeviantArt doesn't let users filter spam from their search results, and so there's nothing stopping Night-Eye from being constantly in your face as much as he likes. Night-Eye hates being ignored and demands to be part of discussions despite not offering any actual content for the discussion. Most of his complaints about me amount to little more than nitpicking clerical errors and hyper-focusing on a single line from individual glass of water videos and pretending that counts as an argument. On 99% of occasions, I have completely ignored Night-Eye's responses, even muting him on both Tumblr and Twitter and ejecting him from my comment section for trying to waste my time. However, on the 1% of occasions where I have actually engaged with him, take a wild guess what happens. If you guessed immediately backpedals and tries to paint the person who engaged with him as an easily triggered snowflake who can't take a joke, you would be right. He does this anytime he gets something even remotely close to criticism, projecting his own insecurities and hurt feelings on everyone else. Night-Eye is terrible at making a critical argument, but he's extremely good at using circular logic so that everything leads back to him being in the right and everyone else is super triggered. It's the basic toolkit of a right-wing pundit. If you ignore him, you're silencing criticism and refusing to engage with them because you know they're right. If you engage with him, you can't take a joke and suddenly he turns from being a detractor to just someone trying to get under your skin, and he thinks it's working, so he thinks that means he wins. Until you remember that people who declare victory in an internet argument are always lying to cover their ass. Of course, the only people who actually buy all this nonsense are first day on the internet kid, and people who already have an axe to grind against whoever Night at Eyes turned his attention to. And that's the problem. It's very easy for small-time YouTubers who endlessly stalk people to pretend they're making good arguments, because their audience becomes comprised only of people who already hate their target in particular, so they end up in an echo chamber where everyone is patting themselves on the back for showing that evil bitch what for. This isn't even exclusive to small-time YouTubers. Thunderfoot has been well known over the last few years for pathologically obsessing over Anita Sarkeesian and gathering an audience that didn't so much enjoy his content as they enjoyed anything that lashed out at this one woman the internet has a grudge over for some reason. Of course, the moment Thunderfoot stops reinforcing the opinions of reactionary sados, that large boost to his audience will immediately vanish because they weren't there for him, they were there to stroke a hate boner. But as a wise woman once said, to be united by hatred is a fragile alliance at best. The likes of Night at Eye and Aguilar work on the same concept. Extremely small insular communities that unite not out of any love for good content, but out of hatred for specific content creators. This is demonstrated by the fact that Aguilar can't go 5 seconds without having new fights with his so-called friends and colleagues, because none of them actually like each other. They just like hating people more popular than them. And the moment the conversation switches to anything else, they start squabbling and trying to tear each other's throats out. More than half of How Not to Brony's content is him passive-aggressively sniping at other people in the Rift and whining about the latest minor argument that he wants to call a war because Aguilar is a fucking drama queen, and this is how a drama queen behaves. And that's ultimately what we're dealing with. These are people who spent a long time in the analysis community and have received very little attention. Aguilar once tried to petition Equestria Daily that small-time analysts should be put up on the site to get them more attention, and by small-time analysts, he meant himself. We briefly talked about this in an Artist Meltdown story. Content creators who produce very low-quality content always get angry when they're not immediately popular, and they start trying to shoulder the burden of building an audience onto other people. Whether you're a YouTuber, an artist, or an independent game developer, incompetence always comes with a sense of deserving a big audience just because you want one. And that's what happened with Aguilar. He made a lot of really shitty reviews, made poorly edited podcasts with better YouTubers, and when that inevitably resulted in very little attention, he started blaming everyone else and dedicated himself to tearing down all those people he personally dislikes and feels don't deserve their own audiences that they've worked hard to build. He is a poorly adjusted brat with a massive sense of entitlement, and association with such garbage should be considered a black mark on anybody's career. And shame on everyone who saw all this going on and did nothing while this despicable piece of human garbage set about terrorizing and tormenting extremely vulnerable people who don't have the support base that we do just because you didn't feel like getting involved in drama and would rather pretend to be aloof and above it all. The next time you want to whine about me supposedly being a hypocrite, remember this and then go fuck yourself, you worthless fucking cowards.